meant to be interactive and a dialogue. And I really hope that with this wide variety of providers today, that we can have a nice conversation about how each of us are coping or struggling through this COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe some tips for self-care, and maybe some permission to allow ourselves to feel however it is we're feeling at this point in time. So please just jump in, unmute yourself, interrupt me with questions and comments. And I will try, I don't even see the chat at the moment. So if somebody wants to just jump in, if there's chat conversation that I'm missing here today. So today I would like to present kind of a short presentation about provider self-care in all times, but particularly in these times of COVID-19. And I'm not trying to come to you today as kind of the expert in self-care, an expert in the end-all be-all expert in this topic, but really coming to you as a fellow healthcare provider that is going through this pandemic and kind of struggling alongside of you. And so I think the big take-home message is kind of flexibility in everything that we do today. So let's get started. Okay. Sorry. So I first just kind of wanted to talk about a little bit about how we conceptualize kind of what's going on, how we're all functioning day to day. Really, I kind of think of St. Patrick's Day as kind of that big key moment, at least in my life. That was the point, I think WVU had shut down and gone online. That was the point that my kids' school had shut down. And really the pandemic became kind of real, that this was here, it was going to affect us personally, and things are going to change. And so I think we went business as usual just up until around March 13th to 16th. Then the pandemic hit. This can also fit with other crises or disasters. We kind of had a chaotic, I'm not sure about all of you, but I know we had a very kind of chaotic, rapid response, shut everything down, figure out how we're going to best serve people in our department. That meant switching completely to teleevaluation and treatment services. And then we kind of got into, you get into this adaptation phase where kind of doing what you can, you're going through the motions, and then you start building new routines, and everybody keeps talking about our new normal. We start kind of just going through the motions. But all of this still suggests that this is new, it's ever evolving, it's changing. It may not be changing daily like it was changing in March and April, but it is definitely still things are shifting. I know a few of us were having a conversation at the start of this when we logged on to the call about WVU's numbers, the students being back, the bars being open, and things are even rapidly changing for us here in Morgantown, as I imagine they are in all of the locations everyone is coming from today. I'm trying to get it, okay. And so I think the key kind of take home point with all of this is that we all have different reactions to stress, different reactions to these difficult situations, and that's okay. And we need to give ourselves permission to feel however it is we feel. We may today feel angry, we may feel scared, sad, or we might be doing okay. Today is just kind of a fine day. So just a reminder that there's really no right way to feel about any situation, but particularly the pandemic. Everybody's situation is slightly different, personal lives, work lives, etc. And so with that, I kind of want to work through some possible reactions people may be having towards the COVID pandemic, and then we're going to get into self-care tips about what we can do about some of these reactions when they come up. But I like to conceptualize these reactions into 4 different quadrants. We have physical reactions, emotional reactions, cognitive reactions, and behavioral reactions. And we're going to go through each individually. So the first is physical reactions. And so this kind of extra level of stress, and I think particularly with the pandemic, we're at what, the 6-month point, and things are actually probably worse than they were in March. And so this is kind of that, it's ongoing, it's longer term than we initially imagined it was going to be. There's not quite that light at the end of the tunnel yet. And so some of these physical reactions we can be experiencing: gastrointestinal, headaches, aches, pains, weight changes, sweating, tremors, clumsiness, chronic fatigue, sleep disturbances. This is a big one. I think I'm coming back to present later on this fall, and I'd like to talk about suicide rates as it relates to the COVID pandemic. And some of the research that's just now coming out is talking about insomnia and sleep disturbances as kind of being a real key concern, particularly for suicidal ideation in times of COVID. But as you can see from some of these, things like headaches are concerning because they're also a symptom of COVID. And so, you know, what can be a stress reaction may also be a symptom of the illness, which makes things very difficult. Some emotional reactions that healthcare providers and people in general are likely feeling during this time. They may be feeling, some healthcare professionals may be feeling very heroic or kind of invulnerable because they're on the front lines and they're working through this pandemic day in and day out. There may be denial that it's real, denial that it's as serious as people are saying, denial that they can get it. Others may be experiencing this heightened anxiety and fear, anxiety about our own health and well-being. I know when I've talked to parents, you know, it's anxiety of children catching the disease or spreading it to other family members, particularly vulnerable family members. There's a feeling of helplessness, loss of control. Again, there's no end in sight to this, and that can be really difficult when it comes to that loss of control. There's exhaustion, not being able to function well, and many of those can lead to symptoms of depression. Some more things specific to healthcare providers is guilt. Healthcare workers may feel guilty about having fears about the illness, the loss of resources, death for themselves, fear, kind of fear and guilt in this case going together, and that they're fearful if they get it, that they could spread it to family members. Guilty that they can't do as much as they want to. There's no cure for COVID. I know researchers are working very quickly to try to come up with a vaccine, as well as treatment options. But sometimes we're just not able to do all that we want to do, not able to care for others because of our fears, not doing enough. We're going to talk about burnout and compassion fatigue in a little bit, but this idea of kind of not feeling like you have enough empathy to give to others because you're struggling in this time. And then there's kind of this guilt that we put on ourselves that we're not coping as well as we should. Like, I'm a mental health care provider. I should know how to deal with anxiety. I should know how to deal with depression. I should know how to cope in this situation. Why am I not doing a better job? And then at some point, feelings of apathy and anger, either on the actions of others or putting others in harm's way. I know in viewing kind of the Facebook reactions to people in Morgantown right now, there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger towards the university administration for having on-campus classes, a lot of anger towards the university students. Yesterday, there were pictures of the lines outside the bars, and people were very angry that their elementary school children may not go to school because WVU students are having fun at the bars. And then it's important to also think about grief. And there's a lot of different ways to conceptualize grief. There's the loss of life that we have had because of this pandemic. There's a loss of people's health. We don't know all the long-term health effects of getting COVID-19. There's also grief over the loss of time, the loss of income if people, millions of people are without jobs. There's lots of resources, conferences have been canceled, different aspects of people's pay has been affected by the pandemic. There's grief about the connections. You know, it would be great to have meetings in person again, to see your colleagues in person, to have seminars and didactics and conferences, but we know that that's not the safest thing. There's also the grief about plans. People have canceled weddings, they don't have birthday parties for their children. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the grieving process can happen for all of these things, that when those big changes come, it's okay to grieve that in theory, we lost the whole summer of time with the pandemic. people may have cognitive reactions to the stressful events, and that can include disorientation and some confusion. There may be poor concentration, difficulty setting priorities. I know one that is pretty common is kind of indecisiveness, or this inability to make decisions, particularly because we talked about that kind of loss of control. There's not this clear guideline that says, yes, you can go to church, but no, you shouldn't go to a restaurant. Yes, the zoo is safe, but maybe the library is less safe. You know, those are really hard decisions that I think everyone is trying to grapple to make. And that heightened level of stress and anxiety makes that decision-making process even harder. There can be a loss of objectivity when some of our emotional reactions are kind of taking over, which leads us to make, you know, if we think of kind of the wise mind, we've got our logical mind, we've got our emotional mind, and we try to kind of sit somewhere in between with a wise mind, but sometimes we lean one way or the other based on how we cope with stressful situations. It can be difficulty disconnecting. I forget what the phrase that I've heard recently is, but they call it like, it's something about scrolling through social media. And they talk about it as like this kind of spiral where you're just kind of scrolling through Facebook, and it's kind of wasting time in essence, having a difficult time getting off of it, maybe disconnecting from the news media can be a way that people are coping cognitively with the stress. You can have a lower level of self-confidence, maybe this inability to function in your normal roles, and along with the sleep disturbances may come some recurring and stressful dreams. Additionally, there's some behavioral reactions that come with times of stress, and that's just change in activity level. Some people will go to alcohol and drug use, increased use of over-the-counter medications. I'm thinking either pain medications if they're feeling some of those physical complaints like headaches, or it could be sleep medications if they're having trouble sleeping. Difficulty communicating or listening to others, irritability, anger, difficulty with job performance, maybe staying up to task, increase in crying, difficulty sleeping, and avoidance of triggering places or activities. Let me stop. This is a busy slide, but an important one for us to talk about. Anyone have any thoughts about those different types of reactions that people may have to the pandemic?
I found indecisiveness to be kind of in the forefront, especially when dealing with my kids and trying to determine, do I send them to school? Do I keep them home? It's been a really big struggle for me, you know, and I think like if I send them, you know, if they get sick or then get, you know, my mother sick, and it's been pretty tough.
Thank you for sharing. I agree. And it's hard with all the unknowns. No one can give you that good answer of how we should handle school with our kids.
Yeah, I would echo that and add that there's a layer I also feel of hypocrisy about that confusion, because I'm supposed to be like a behavioral health expert for kids, and I'm very conflicted between what I know is emotionally healthy and what is medically healthy and safe. And it's a real challenge to struggle with that choice too, when you have competing yet equally positive needs that just can really make you feel paralyzed.
Lauren, have you been dealing with a lot of parents wanting you to give them advice on how to handle these decisions?
A little bit. It's been kind of interesting. I think a lot of people sort of struggle with that same kind of challenge. I think especially parents that are working are really struggling a lot with like daycare, like if they can't send their, I mean, I think they want to send their kids back, but the shifting nature of like choosing between keeping their job and sending their kids to school, I think has been a bigger challenge for the patients I've seen. It's also really interesting. I got some referral requests because as people are trying to make decisions about virtual, you know, it kind of takes a special kid and family to be able to keep up with the executive functioning and self-organization needs of doing self-paced stuff. And definitely got some requests for, do you think my kid can do this? Do they possess the ability to sort of self-pace, especially kids with kind of like ADHD or some motivation and depressive stuff? And those are complicated answers because the easy answer is, well, no minor usually has the ability to do that. It really depends on looking at how the whole family functions and what works. But I think the theme has been, like you said, everybody has such different needs and different reactions that it's a very personalized decision for every single family, and the choices they're making, there's not a whole lot of comparison. Every family is faced with their own kind of specific needs and wants, and you have to be very respectful of that, because even though they're themes, it's just a very different experience for every child and every family.
I think that's an important point, kind of off this topic, but to support our families in whatever decision they've kind of chosen to make in this time, because there's not necessarily a right answer, and they're going to get that criticism from both sides. You keep your kids home and you're ruining them socially. You send them to school and they're going to get sick. And so there's that, I know for me, mom guilt that comes into play. Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. There is two examples that I have personal here. I'm working from home. I was really sick, tested twice for COVID, didn't have it, but I have a lot of respiratory issues. So I haven't gone back to church or anything. I'm real careful about that. But my son and his family moved in with us because they sold their house and they're waiting to buy. And now they're looking at maybe doing something even on our property. But they have a 3.5-year-old and a 10-month-old, and the 10-month-old had teeth coming in, so she has a fever. So today she's home. So my son had to stay home, but they wanted, because I'm working from home, can you help? The 3 days they have to be out because that's the protocol. Even though we know it's her teeth, she doesn't have a fever today. She's not allowed to go back to care for 3 days. And they're like, well, can you help watch half a day and we'll help, because they're running out of time. And yet, I'm really working. So trying to help, but everybody's in a hard place because nobody's got time to just be home for 3 days. And you understand the protocol, but you also, you know that it's not, she doesn't have COVID. She has 4 teeth coming in. And my other friend who's working, she's working in a school district and she works with special needs children. So the teachers went back, but the kids in her class don't have to wear a mask, but they're real bad about behavior. So she said they wear a mask, but they pour glasses, they pour a mask, they spit, so there's a risk that she's worried about too, not just for her, but for each of those children, so it's going to be very challenging. I feel bad, both sides. You can see both sides, because then what do the parents at work that send their kids do? But, so you're hearing it from both sides, and it is very stressful for parents. I'm one, and I'll tell you what, I have a husband with dementia who's not too bad, but this has been a challenging week. And now with this, I feel like I got to retire at 62 to just take care of everybody. So it's making everybody a little crazy, because it's not the regular stressors, but now you've got all these on top. And I do get frustrated with people when they're throwing a fit at these minimum wage workers that just are trying to enforce the mask. And I think if everybody would just, well, then we all could be out. So I do get a little frustrated.
Yeah, I don't know how much I shared at the beginning today, but I'm currently home because my almost 2-year-old threw up this morning, and my first thought was, it's not likely COVID, but let's not risk this. I'll stay home and work from home today. So yeah, it's very difficult. And, I think I have the privilege of being able to say, okay, I'm staying home, and nobody at work blinked an eye that I said, hey, can we change this meeting to Zoom today? But I understand that there are many families that don't have that ability, and many healthcare workers that don't have that ability to switch to tele like we do as mental health providers, where we can kind of do that talk therapy.
I have a unique situation. 2 weeks prior to COVID beginning, I received chemotherapy, so I still continue to work. Unfortunately, I got exposed to somebody that was COVID positive. We were not aware. She ended up passing away. So of course they put me out of work for about 7 weeks, which seems like an awesome idea, 7 weeks off of work, but it drove me nuts. Like I'm a worker bee. I love working. So it was very difficult for me I felt guilty that I was at home doing absolutely nothing. So I kept on contacting them saying, can I do something? Can I help in some way? So that was a big thing for me to kind of work through. And then the other part was fear. I had a lot of fear of going back. So it was kind of like this double, like what you're about to go into, double-edged sword. It literally was that double-edged sword for me because I was fearful of going back, but then didn't want to be home. I really didn't. I wanted to be on the forefront. I wanted to be working. So it was very unique for me.
Madeline, I
That's how
hope that was your name. I lost that. I hope that you'll share maybe some tips and strategies you had as you worked through some of that kind of guilt and fear, even if it was just take it one day at a time to get through that when we get to some of the tips in a little bit.
Sure.
Go ahead, Donna.
That's what I was going to say. When I was first off, I mean, I was coughing my head off. There's no way. And I'm a disease management coordinator, but they had asked us to help me in the COVID lines. And I did it for like a week with asthma very bad, and I just kept managing it. And then finally I just couldn't because I was just coughing all the time. And that's when they had me get tested. But I felt the same way. Like I felt guilty. I was off for 2 months, and it took all that 2 months plus my work at home, or at first another month before I even really had stamina to do a whole day of work. But I felt the same way. Like I felt like when they were thanking the heroes, I wasn't a hero because I wasn't helping anymore. And I knew I couldn't talk hardly, but I felt guilty because my coworkers are there exposing themselves and I wasn't helping. So I know how you felt about that, but I'm glad you're doing well though.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about some of this double-edged sword. And then we'll get to some of our tips. There's this, and I think this is a great slide to talk about some of the things as healthcare workers that are definitely our strengths can also be our vulnerabilities. And the first is what everyone has been talking about with the thank you to the healthcare workers is kind of that selflessness. And they jumped right in there. I think about being a nurse on a COVID unit, it terrifies me, the thought of having to kind of gown up and everything. But they place their own welfare, they place patients' welfare over their own. But at the same time, it can be a vulnerability because they may not seek help for the problems because their personal health isn't a priority, or they feel like they should be able to handle this. This is what they were meant to do. This is what they've trained to do for years. Also, loyalty. I think this is some of what Donna was just talking about. It's this commitment to accomplish this mission, to protect others. And then you get that guilt and even complicated bereavement, depending on the situation, about not being there and not doing enough. And I think sometimes we're our own worst critics when it comes to that. There's this stoicism, idea of toughness, ability to endure hardships. We shouldn't complain about it. We shouldn't be having a hard time. We should just deal with it. Like, people have it worse than us, but we're just going to keep it all inside. And I think this one is also a cultural aspect of living in Appalachia. I know we have people from Virginia and other places here today, but I think our common kind of denominator is Appalachia. And Appalachia is this kind of stoicism, this toughness, this ability to repeatedly endure hardships. But sometimes it makes us less self-aware of what we're suffering, or unwillingness to acknowledge some suffering. And then one thing they talk about moral code or moral injury when it comes to burnout. And it's this idea of we have really strong internal compass of what is right and what is wrong, but that can come into conflict when it comes to maybe administration or the lack of PPE or different protocols that are going on, can all come into conflict with our moral injury. It's this idea that I should be able to save this person. I know what the right thing to do, but I'm stopped. I've got barriers in the way. They can feel frustrated and betrayed when people either don't fail to follow our same moral code, or we can't because of some sort of limitation. And then this excellence. We need to be the best, most effective professional possible at all times. And this idea that we can't ever show weakness. And so then that comes this kind of shame denial, minimization when we have these cracks in the armor. Thoughts on this one before I move on? Okay. I'm trying the 8-second rule, and it's really difficult on Zoom, but the idea that when you ask a question, you give people 8 seconds of silence, it's a tough one. Donna, did you have a question? All right, so let's talk about self-care obstacles, talk briefly about burnout, and then we're gonna get into the self-care tips because I promised them to you and we're at 12:30. So some self-care obstacles when it comes to attitude, and we're talking about attitudes and behavior. It's thoughts like, it would be selfish of me to take a break from work. Others are working hard, so I should be working hard. I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm not even tired. The needs of those I'm supporting are more important than my own needs. I can contribute the most by working all of the time. I don't want anyone to know how affected I am, and only I can do X, Y, and Z. And I think these are interesting because it seems to me that some of these statements, maybe in a very acute crisis, a very short term, might be okay. They might kind of help us get through. I'm okay, I'm fine, take it one more day. And I think that was where we were in March, April, maybe even May. This is an acute crisis. We're gonna ride that cortisol, adrenaline rush to get through this crisis. And then when we get to the end, we're gonna have time to kind of rest and recoup and come back. But unfortunately, that wasn't the nature of the pandemic that we are working through. And so those acute crises, those strategies that work for acute crises, they don't work here. We can't keep using an adrenaline rush because at some point our bodies are going to be depleted. And some behavioral self-care obstacles can be working too many hours without checking in on yourself. I was listening to some self-care webinars in the beginning of COVID, and they talked a lot about when you're working from home, things start to blur. So there may not be that I start work, I stop work, I have the 20-minute drive home. And so people start working later into the evening, they work through dinner, and you end up working these kind of longer hours without breaks because it's just one Zoom call after the next Zoom call after the next Zoom call. May keep stress to ourselves, inflexibly concentrating only on what to do next. So kind of that not looking at the long-term bigger picture, and relying only on alcohol and substances to relax for extended periods of time. So this is not meant to be a judgment. Many of us may drink, many of us may drink as a means to relax, but it's kind of this idea, if this is the only coping strategy, or if it's starting to interfere with your functioning, that's probably not the best way to go. Okay, let's talk about burnout, compassion fatigue, and we'll get into tips. So what comes to my mind when I first think about burnout, and it's a saying I know we use over and over again, but it's this idea of the rules when you get on an airplane when it comes to face masks, and the idea that we put on the face mask, we put our own face mask on first before we put on the face mask of a child, which initially makes you think, oh, no, I've got to save this child. I need to put their face mask on first so they can breathe. But the idea being, if I don't take care of me, if I don't get my face mask on, I don't have enough oxygen to save this child. And I think it's something I always come back to. I come back to it with patients. I come back to it with myself, that I have to come up with a way to care for myself, or I can't care for the patients and my family. And burnout and compassion fatigue is this idea, it's the end of the process of stress. It's the not wanting to go to work, not feeling that empathy that you would normally feel for patients. And it's this idea, if we don't take care of each other, that's the one I was talking about, we can't take care of others. And they found that the effectiveness of providers can be increased when the knowledge that everyone reacts and they cope in their own way. And it's kind of this recognition that you're doing the best that you can, that what you are doing is making a difference. and to make sure we're reframing the positive, but not being overly naive that things are really hard and really stressful at this point. Okay, we're going to get into some tips. Does anybody want to share what they've been doing during this pandemic that's been helpful? We'll see if I got some of them.
Sorry. So my son used to have a buzz cut. He's almost 8. And his hair grew out because we didn't want to bring him to the hairdresser. So now we know that he has this gorgeous blonde honey brown hair. So I'm like, your COVID hair, see, this is a good thing. It's one good thing that happened from COVID. You have gorgeous hair. And he loves his hair now. So trying to reframe a pandemic and fancy hair. He likes that one.
I think the reframing is really important. I've been telling people lately, I think at least where I work and in my job, the idea that I can work from home when I need to and have somewhat of that flexibility has been a really positive to come out of COVID. Because I think I go back and forth about whether it's going to help families in the long run, this flexibility.
This
Anyone
may
else
seem
wanna
like
share?
a weird thing to say, but I've tried to pretend that I'm a patient and I'm giving myself advice because I don't listen to myself very well. And again, that sort of hypocrisy sometimes of knowing what I should do and what I feel compelled to do gets me stuck. And sometimes I literally make myself pretend that I'm giving myself advice as someone else because I don't listen to myself very well. And so I've really, it's really been perspective taking about that self-care piece. I think it's something I never really felt I needed to pay attention to because I always felt okay, and I became more aware that I was not. And I've really had to reframe that though as learning and understanding and making me better at my job. And again, it's that reframe. But I've also had to find ways to relax because a lot of the things I did for fun to turn my brain off, I can't do, like go on vacation or go get a massage. And so I really had to become aware of that doing things physically was how I relieve stress, and like doing things with my hands. So I bought a bunch of giant Lego sets and pottery from our Wow factory, and I've had to like make myself have time to do these like highly detailed physical tasks just to shut my mind off. And so I have the Disney Cinderella Castle 4,000 piece Lego set completed on my dining room table. That was my COVID self-care project.
That is wonderful. It reminds me, I went to the dentist this week and the hygienist told me, yeah, I've got a couple of cavities. I haven't gotten them filled. I haven't had a cleaning in 3 years. And I was like, yeah, you're a real person. Like, we don't always take our own advice that we're handing out to everyone. I love the idea of reframing strategies of self-care that we can't quite do anymore. That's a wonderful one. Next time you'll have to show us a picture of your Disney castle.
I had to learn the word adaptability. It was very difficult because I'm not an adaptable person apparently. And so this one was a little bit more difficult than I expected. And I had to do a lot of internalization as far as like, why am I so I don't like adapting to anything. I'm a very rigid, I guess. I never really paid attention to this, but I'm a very rigid person. So I do things a very methodical way. And so for me, this whole COVID thing has been just a period of like learning how to adapt to a situation and how I can learn I don't have to be so rigid.
It sounds like one of those double-edged swords, because I bet your rigidity made you really good at your job and yet didn't work when you had to take, how many weeks did you say, 10 weeks off?
It was altogether 8. It was the first 2 weeks were, okay, you just had chemotherapy. You should probably not be at work. And then I came back, got exposed, and I was off an additional 6.5 weeks. So 8.5 weeks altogether. It was horrible. Horrible.
I was very thankful to be able to be at home. I luckily, well, it's gone now, but I had that bank, extended illness bank, that gave me, peace of mind that I was paid. I mean, it was very comforting because I was home, and when I was coughing so hard I couldn't do anything. But one of the things that back then it was just my husband and I thought, well, we're getting along, so when I retire we'll still get along. I wasn't sure, 43 years of marriage, but we've had children all that time, and activities. I wasn't sure we could stand each other, so that was a good thing. But I also think that I did things like pictures. I have a master's degree in archiving as well as nursing. So my thing is to museum, I do this for families, help them preserve their pictures. I never have time to do mine. So that was something that I could do quietly and not talk. And so I found that I was, feeling productive. And I will say to Madeline, I'm well glad you're doing well, but I know when I had chemo and you sound a little like me. I'm the caregiver. I'm the one that takes care of people. One of the things I had to do was let people do that. And I had, and I thought, well, what do I do when somebody's sick? I take them things. So I had to let people bring me food and stuff. But you're dealing with during COVID when people can't help you. So it's like a whole different ball game. It's not our normal, that's the time that the way normally care for others is not allowed right now. So it kind of like takes your regular way of coping away.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about some of these other strategies, and I hope people will kind of come in with things that have worked for them, or for some people, they may not have found what worked. They may have been struggling this whole time, and they may still be struggling. I think the first is kind of having that support system. Kind of that water cooler talk, in times not with COVID. You might just pop by your colleague's office and chat with them about something. And I think one of the hard parts of COVID was the number of emails that started coming out and the number of Zoom meetings. And it was like, wait a second, this could have been done in a pop to their office and ask them a question in 5 seconds. And it's turned into this whole big issue, mostly because we don't have our normal support systems in place. But it's this idea of finding new ways, having maybe short Zoom conversations with people or calling them on the phone to share concerns or to problem solve with colleagues and family and friends, to plan coping steps. And to keep in mind that we're pacing ourselves. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Monitor yourself for fatigue, go to bed early if you need to. Monitor yourself for irritability, poor focus, higher anxiety, kind of those little check-ins throughout the day. Steps we can take. And so these are things I bet we all know, but I think it's important to point out in times of stress. Breathe, mindful breathing several times a day. I don't know if anybody has an Apple Watch, but they have a Breathe app on it, and I don't know if it senses that my breathing is getting shallow, my heart rate's increasing. I'm guessing it might, but it often pops up during the day and says, breathe, practice breathing with us. You can set it for 1 minute and it'll kind of vibrate when it wants you to increase or inhale and when it wants you to exhale. And it's just following that kind of diaphragmatic breathing, slowing down your respiration, being in the present moment kind of helps ground us. And setting up kind of times when this can occur. Maybe it's right before a Zoom call, you take a few deep breaths and focus. Maybe it's right after a Zoom call, in between appointments, getting out of the car, entering your workspace. I'd heard somebody did it when they walked through doorways. That was their key to take one deep breath. I thought that was an interesting strategy. Maintaining good health habits. I know this one can be very difficult. But limiting alcohol, prioritizing exercise, getting sunlight. The sunlight's the one that makes me a little bit nervous as this pandemic keeps going, because luckily we just hit summer and, I could take the kids outside, let them run off some energy, but I'm not sure what we're going to do come December. It's dark at 5 o'clock. Things might get a little cold. Things might get a little bit harder to get outside, and healthy eating as well. Another thing that can help with stress is to keep moving. And this is kind of what Lauren was talking about, is that some of the strategies that people have used, going to gyms or going to specific Outlook, as my watch is going off, going to specific locations that have maybe like CrossFit or Orange Theory or cycling classes. And those kind of have been COVID hotspots, at least here in Morgantown. And so a lot of people are having to exercise from home. YouTube has a ton of exercises, different yoga videos. Yoga can be very helpful just for stress relief and for physical kind of flexibility and exercise. This note about the Peloton app being free for 90 days, that was at the very beginning of COVID. I'm not sure that that is still going on. But Yoga with Adrienne, she's pretty fantastic, and she does 30-day calendars every month of free yoga classes right on YouTube. No need to buy anything there. Staying connected is really important. Calls, FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, Google Hangouts, ways to just reduce our isolation. I know families talk about having elderly family members in nursing homes that they haven't seen for months, and people have been very creative in finding ways to safely see family and friends. Consider joining other family members for a meal over social media to reduce isolation. And I think at this point in the pandemic, also maybe finding ways to socially distance and have some family time, maybe outside where we can keep for the distance. It's important to take breaks, taking mini breaks, a little bit of exercise, a little bit of stretching, particularly when you're working from home or even when you're working kind of at work, making sure you're taking that time and that you're not just pushing through, but checking in with yourself. And promoting teamwork. So this is another one that I think has been difficult with people switching to Zoom, but it's trying to keep your team kind of all on the same page, everyone working together without inundating people, maybe with emails, but finding kind of new strategies that will work for your team. And, you know, one thing that I have noticed and I have had to ask people is to be really flexible with me in this time. And I will say, I think a lot of people have been wonderful in that understanding that I may have to stay home like today because my kid is sick and I don't want to expose you. And I texted a colleague this morning and said, hey, I'm not coming in today, I'm working from home. And they said, what can I email you so you don't have to worry about virtual desktops, because that's always very slow. And so it's, you know, working with your team members to help each other in these times, make things a little bit easier, and be flexible when we can, because everyone's story is different, everyone's situation is different, and everyone is kind of struggling in those different ways. Maintaining a structure, getting some routine. It's a different routine, but it's a routine. You know, a consistent workspace to help focus and the productivity, planning breaks, establishing boundaries. I know personally, I worked very hard to establish a boundary between work and home. Doesn't always work. I may bring things home, but I've tried very hard to keep them apart. And then when COVID hit, it was like, oh no, the boundaries aren't there. I'm working on writing an evaluation and I can hear my kids screaming downstairs. And that was a very hard transition for me. Anyways, thoughts on that one? Anyone find ways that they've maintained structure between the two? And the next one's flexibility. It's okay if we have to ask for help. We should be asking for help. We should be asking for support when we need it. And hopefully, if we can be that person that asks for that support, we might make it easier for our colleagues to ask for support back. Because I think many of us are willing to help our colleagues, but we don't always know what they need. And so kind of breaking that barrier might make it easier for everybody to get through this. And I think this is my last slide. So we'll spend the last kind of 10 minutes talking about other strategies people have used. The practice of gratitude. We know there's research that says that writing down 3 things that you're grateful for every day can reduce anxiety and depression. And practicing gratitude is thanking the people who have gone above and beyond. Is there someone who's been very supportive for you, helped you in times of need? And are there ways that we can show that appreciation? and taking time to reflect. And people talked about documenting. And I can say I did not do a good job, but I thought it was a really interesting idea. At the beginning of the pandemic, people talked about keeping a journal of all the kind of things that were just chaotic and strange. Somebody said they were keeping a list of all of the things that were sold out in the stores so that years later they could look back and be like, oh, March of 2020, we couldn't find toilet paper. We couldn't find Clorox wipes. We couldn't find Lysol. And then, oh, September 2020, we still can't find Clorox. We still can't find Lysol. That'd be interesting to go back on. And other people were using it as a way to process emotions. Today I was having a hard day, or today things were going okay. So now I'm going to open it up to everybody. Share tips, strategies, how you're coping.
So I like to kind of stockpile my vacation time. We get a ton of it at the Veterans Hospital, but and especially in COVID, it's like I always disaster plan ahead with a disaster nowhere in sight. So it's like I have to have 4 months. What if? And I don't have money saved up. I got to pay the mortgage. So Monday, I took a day off. I saw the weather, and I said it's going to be like fall, and we went for a 5-hour bike ride, and it was awesome. So.
Yeah, that's another one of those tough ones. Like I need to save it all, but I also need to take some time to myself. Great. I'm glad you used that time.
I was the opposite. I was supposed to go on a cruise this week. The cruise obviously got canceled because of COVID. Then we were going to go to the mountains. Well, my husband's military, so we can't go outside of a 150-mile radius, which if you've ever lived in rural Georgia, there's nothing here. So unfortunately, we're here at home. So we found creative things that we could do together. So I've learned that you still have to take that time off. Even though I know I had time off initially, these last 3 months, 4 months that I have been working, it's been a daily constant, wearing the mask, wearing the PPE, and making sure that I'm not too close to the patient, making sure that I am close enough to the patient that I can at least hear their heart. That's important. But knowing that there is that even balance of being able to take time off later when you're needing it, when you do need it.
I think you bring up a really good point that we need to keep in mind, kind of the toll that just wearing all of that PPE and the cognitive thoughts of standing too close but too far away. You're having to modulate your voice differently than before because the mask muted a little bit and you're trying to not yell at the patient, but make sure that they're understanding, it's kind of exhausting, all those extra little things that we're kind of keeping in our mind, making sure I'm going to wash my hands, I'm going to sanitize more often. Who else has found some strategy that's worked for them to cope through COVID?
Well, this one might sound simple, but I know when we were still working in the office, we would, of course, have our lunch breaks. And I found that during COVID, I would be working from home, working through my lunch, and I didn't really have that dedicated time for lunch. And so I make it a point every day to at least take 30 minutes, no email, nothing, just take a time for, having a little lunch break. And I found that really helps actually, so.
Yeah, that's a great one, because I think some of us, even in the office, sometimes forget to take that 30-minute lunch break, shut everything down. I know when I was working more from home, I tried to have lunch with my kids, and that was actually quite wonderful to have that opportunity. I'm going to, maybe I'm not. All right, how do I unshare? There we go.
Oh,
okay.
Awesome.
So we can see people while they're trying to talk here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Willard. That was a really great didactic and super timely. So we really appreciate it. And thank you all so much, for joining in. This wouldn't be possible without any of you. So I really appreciate you all as well sharing your stories and personal experiences. But We do still have 5 minutes. Any other comments, questions for Dr. Willard?
I just want to say thank you. This was really wonderful. Thanks for having us from LMU. We have a bunch of us. We heard that you all were really great, and it's true. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I love the big crowd today.
Yes, it was very nice to be able to vent a little bit and to hear other people are having the same struggles. I'm a extrovert, so I miss hugging. I went to the office for just a few hours the other day because I needed to do something with my computer, and it was very difficult not to hug people. And so I really have to restrain myself. So today I got to hug my son, and it's been like, he hasn't let us hug. He didn't want to expose me, and I didn't. He's been careful too. So I said, can I hug you? And so today I got to hug him. It's been like 4 months. So it was to do it. But it's hard not getting to do our regular things. And my coworkers, that's, you know, we're going to, even if we start going back to the office, we're going to try to not be there at the same time because our spaces aren't spread out very well. And, you know, that's, like you said, that's what kind of, that camaraderie build a really good team. And we can do that somewhat on email, but it's not the same. So I think it does change the dimension of your workforce and your work family.
Absolutely.
They have that feature to like raise your hand and everything. I think it would be great if they have a feature to do a virtual hug, but that's just my personal opinion. That one's
I like it.
Or like an elbow bump, a virtual elbow bump.
I totally agree. Well, if there are no other questions, as always, feel free to reach out via email or anything. Ask me questions through that. I'll make sure to have them addressed. Just a couple housekeeping announcements before we do part ways. Our next session will be on September 16th, and Amanda Newhouse will be providing our didactic. So keep an eye out for that reminder. Just another quick plug, we are starting a new ECHO project around memory health and Alzheimer's. So if you would like to join in for that session as well, just shoot me an email and I'll send you over the registration link to sign up. But that's everything for now. So thank you all so much. This was an excellent session and group, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.